But either way, I thought we did have your email address. It's all good.
Well, you have the email address to my desktop computer. This is and it doesn't have video or audio. So I have this laptop.
Okay, well, we will.
That I'm using.
Good. So we'll be able to get you exactly what you need. Awesome. Yes. So while you're typing that in, I'm just going to greet hello, Rhonda. I love that you're here live. I love that all of us are here live. We're here for Practitioner Training Tuesday, one of my favorite times of the week. If you're watching on YouTube, welcome. If you're watching on the replay, also welcome. I'm so glad that you made time to come and join us. I'm your host, as always. I'm Gina Schatz. I am both a manual and movement practitioner, have been in our industry working full-time for 30 years. So I've been around the ropes a few times. And now one of my greatest joys is to meet with practitioners too, and not just clients. So I developed clinically the Schatz method along the way, along that fruitful career path journey. And I also share that method with other practitioners so that you could also use the method in your work. And the method is designed to get to the source of pain and to eradicate it and to correct functional patterns and all the good things. So what we do on Tuesdays is we meet for an hour and we just talk functional anatomy. And then I open up the Q&A lines for any questions that are on your mind. It doesn't have to be functional anatomy related, although it could be. It doesn't even have to be related to what I talked to you about today. You can come with questions. A lot of you are emailing me your questions, which I love, and I'm happy to address them. And that's how I got to today's topic, actually. I heard from a practitioner who had been here for a Training Tuesday that the topic that we had covered was unreachable for that practitioner. And that made me feel my feels, actually, a couple of them. A couple different feelings. I felt grateful for the honesty so that I got that feedback from the practitioner that like, hey, I don't know what you're talking about. Like that. I love the I'm grateful for that. I love the clarity so that I could speak into that, which is literally why I'm here every week, so that I can support you. That is my main job on Tuesdays. It's my full intention. And it also alarmed me a little bit because if we are working in our craft to eradicate pain and we're not still clear on functional anatomy and the foundation of the parts of functional anatomy, makes it really difficult to create the results that we want, which is not a judgment. The question that comes to mind for me is that if we're not creating the results that we want to create for our clients, then what happens to our confidence along the way? If we're not creating the results, our confidence tends to lower. And when our confidence lowers, now we're sort of pushing the boulder uphill, start to feel like we're Sisyphus a little bit. And I believe that's how our one of the components that creates a shortened career span for a lot of us. We don't have the confidence that we deserve to have. We're not creating the results that we desire to create. And then we think, well, we just must need to jump ship. And that's not true. So, and that is why I mentioned I've been at this rodeo for a while. It's possible. We don't have to have 4 to 6 year career paths. So thank you for your notes for the practitioner who shared that with me. I super appreciate it for a million reasons and the couple that I just mentioned. And so what I decided with that feedback was, let's go back to the basics. Let's go back to the principles of alignment and anatomy and principles of movement, right? They're slightly different. Alignment and movement and anatomy are obviously cousins in relationship to each other as conversation content. But there's definitely some similarities when it comes to function. You have to know the anatomy to be able to know function. In order to correct function and optimize alignment, you've got to know what anatomy is up for you in that way. So I have identified along the way 8 principles. And Rhonda, I do believe that I just saw that you got the download guide for the first 4 principles.
I did.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Totally putting you on the spot here. Are you liking it? Are you enjoying it? Have you dug in yet?
I did look it over briefly. Okay. It did make sense. And if I recall correctly, I kind of knew those 4.
Okay, perfect. Beautiful. So then this should serve as review for you. And of course, in a guide, which you're all welcome to download, by the way, you know, a dozen or so pages. So we don't get to dive in completely into all the areas that we can go, but it's to remind you, these are the principles. Are you utilizing the principles, right? So I'm going to just grab my assistant here. This is Murph, and he loves to play. And I've not been putting him to work the last few weeks. So he gets to join us today. So one of the principles that we're going to talk about today is about reciprocal inhibition, because the question that was brought to me, or the topic that was brought to me from this practitioner who gave feedback, was that we were talking about reciprocal inhibition the day that this practitioner joined us, and they didn't know what reciprocal inhibition is. So I want to dive into that a bit, because if we are not utilizing reciprocal inhibition, we can't actually correct function. So it's kind of a big deal. I want you to have it. So in the anatomy principles, we talk about both the lever system and reciprocal inhibition. And the lever system is the first place to think about when we talk about movement. And so that is, for example, if Murph were to flex his elbow, this being flexion of the elbow, the muscles here on the anterior side of the elbow are the ones that are contracting and pulling. Muscles pull, they don't push, pulling the forearm towards the upper arm. Okay. So that means this muscle here, or group of muscles, contracted, and on the opposite side of the elbow, these muscles lengthen, okay? Both of those have to happen in order for movement to occur. So sometimes we're instructing students, if we're movement practitioners, to move an arm or move a leg, and the movement happens at the joint, and we need to know the joint action, and we need to know how that movement is created. The movement is created by two things. One, a contraction, and two, a lengthen. So stretching doesn't exist, which is another principle of anatomy, but it does exist in response to contraction. We call it lengthening. Okay, great. So this is flexion of the elbow. Perfect. Now, if I want to extend my elbow and straighten my arm, or lengthen my arm back down at the side of my body, I'm going to do that through muscle action, and I'm going to lower my hand down. And the way that movement was created was now these muscles lengthened and these muscles contracted. So it's always a lever. In order for movement to occur, there's a muscle or group of muscles contracting, and there's a muscle and group of muscles lengthening in response to that contraction. And it happens everywhere in the body at every joint. The reason why that's so important to know is because if there is pain in any area of that lever action, if when a client goes to move their elbow, for example, or any joint in the body, and there's pain, it's either the pain in the muscle that's doing the action, the muscle that's contracting, or it's pain in the muscle that needs to lengthen in response to that contraction. Same thing in reverse. If I go then to straighten my elbow, bending my elbow felt fine, but straightening my elbow elicited some pain, it's either the muscle that was lengthening that was just contracted, or the muscle that contracted that was just lengthened. And sometimes muscles can get themselves into a little bit of a problem switching from contraction to lengthen and lengthen to contraction. That's also something we get to know if we're navigating functional anatomy and optimizing function in any way. Another way that this is so important to recognize as a principle is that if I am not able to bend my elbow, like there's just the inability there, but two things are happening to bend the elbow, as we've said 3 times now. These muscles are contracting and these muscles are lengthening. If I'm not able to do the joint action, it's either the muscles that are meant to contract aren't doing their job, or they're inhibited in some way from doing their job, or the muscles that are lengthening are not allowing the muscles that are contracting to do their job, because they're either not lengthening or not able to lengthen. Okay, so now we have 4 different places where we get to look in order to restore function. Now, this relationship in the lever system, contract and lengthen in response to contract, this relationship that we're using the elbow for seems super easy when we're talking elbow because it's just flexion, it's a hinge joint. But when we start getting into more complex joint actions, like at the shoulder, where it's a 360 joint, all of those joint actions also are created, movement is created with all of those joint actions through a lever. So if I go to flex my shoulder, same thing. These muscles here contract. I need one more hand. If I go to flex my shoulder, let me just do this. If I go to flex my shoulder, these muscles here contract and these muscles lengthen, which means these muscles have to be strong enough to contract and able to contract, meaning they're not holding any compensatory patterns or atrophy or anything like that. And as practitioners, we get to identify if this joint action can't happen, what's stopping it. And it might not be the muscle or muscles that are contracting. It might be the muscles that are lengthening, not allowing the contraction to occur. In which case we need to figure out what's wrong with the lengthening, what's inhibiting the lengthening from occurring. Same thing if we go in reverse. Let's say we can take our shoulder into flexion, but we can't take it into extension. That means that these muscles aren't contracting, aren't strong enough to contract, are inhibited from contracting, and these muscles in the front must lengthen. And are they doing that? And if not, why? So then we also have in a 360 joint, we also have lateral rotation and medial rotation. A little bit harder to show in, in distance over camera. And medial rotation doesn't happen in the hand, just like lateral rotation doesn't happen in the hand. In fact, you could create movement here where it looks like there's medial and lateral rotation, but notice I'm holding Murph's shoulder stable and I'm still moving the hand medial and lateral. And that's based on the muscles and the joint formation in the forearm that allows for supination and pronation. So don't think that lateral and medial rotation is something that you see in the hands. It's something that happens in the shoulder, unless the joint action that you're talking about is supination and pronation, supination and pronation. So another anatomy principle is joint action. You got to know the joint action and what's actually happening. Movement is a function of joints moving. Movement is joint action. Contraction moves muscles that move joints, right? So however you want to say it, the movement is happening at the joint, unless it isn't happening at the joint and you're intending for it to happen at the joint. So if I want to do a shoulder exercise, for example, let's say I'm in a strength conditioning scenario, either my own body weight or external body weight, and I'm trying to strengthen my shoulders, but it looks like the movement is happening because I'm identifying that the movement at the hand is actually happening, hand or wrist. I might not actually be using this lever at all to do medial and lateral rotation. Now, as a practitioner, we get to know that, because if medial and lateral rotation is not happening in the shoulder girdle, that's a function largely of rotator cuff muscles. That's a rotator cuff restriction. Rotator cuffs needed for stability. If we don't have phasic action of medial and lateral rotation, we don't have stable action either. So that could be where the pain is coming from, that the muscles aren't actually doing their job when they're meant to be doing their job. The body of the person is moving out in space at the gym or at yoga or at Pilates, but it's not actually creating joint action, which means the lever system is not operating. So taking us back to the lever system again, to do lateral rotation, these muscles must lengthen, these muscles must contract. And some of these being underneath, one of the muscles is also underneath the scapula too. To do medial rotation at the shoulder, these muscles contract and shorten, these muscles lengthen in response. Okay, so in order for us to identify a joint action, we got to know the joint action. It's one of the principles of anatomy. And we need to know what muscle does that action. And we need to know the lever system, meaning contraction is the action and the lengthening is in response. Once we're positive of the joint action and we know the muscles that do that joint action, then we know the muscles that are doing the action and the muscles that are doing the lengthening. And then if something's awry in function, then we get to ask ourselves, why is it awry? Is the contraction not happening, or is the lengthening not happening? Or did I mistakenly think that the person was doing the movement because I saw their hand moving, for example, down here, but forgot that actually medial and lateral rotation is a function of the shoulder, not of the wrist and hand. So we get to know all of those things as we're watching someone move. If you're a manual practitioner and you're not watching movement specifically, that's okay. The pain that your clients are coming to you with happened from movement. It either happened from the way they're moving or it happened from the way they're not moving. And again, we go back to the principles of anatomy and decide what is the movement, what should be happening, and are they doing it that way? And there's ways to test for that. You just put the joint into the action and know what muscle should be activating to do the contraction and what muscle should be allowing the contraction by lengthening. So I put a couple of the principles all together here in this explanation. Stretching is not a command that comes from the brain. Stretching is in response to contraction. That is a command that comes from the brain. We get to know that. A lot of us like to stretch because we think that's going to alleviate pain. It doesn't. It almost doesn't even really include lengthening. I'm going to come right back to your message, Rhonda. I'm going to stay put here so I can remember what I'm reviewing, and I'll be right back. Action happens at a joint. So movement happens at a joint. It doesn't happen in an arm or a leg. It happens in the shoulder or the elbow or the wrist or the hip or the knee or the ankle. It doesn't happen in the leg or the arm. Okay. You can cue that obviously to your students and your clients. Go ahead and step your leg back. Cool. You don't want to have to say hyperextend your hip. They'll be like, do what? Right. But we get to know where the movement's happening. If a client, for example, steps their leg back or moves their arm back, but the muscles that are meant to do that contraction aren't contracting, we have a compensatory pattern on our hands. We get to correct that. That's where the corrective function comes from. So we need to know what muscle is doing that action, contraction, and what muscle is allowing it. And if the movement's not happening, or the muscles that are meant to be doing the movement aren't happening, we get to figure out which one needs our help, maybe both. Okay. And then we talked about that as the lever system. And the next thing that I wanted to take us to was reciprocal inhibition. And that's where the feedback that I got from the practitioner that was here that day was like, what are you talking about? Because all of those things play into an understanding of reciprocal inhibition. So I'm going to come back to reciprocal inhibition in 1 second. Let me just read your love note, Rhonda, and see where we're at. In the shoulder, medial rotation example, is the rhomboid included too? Oh, good question. So you tell me, Rhonda, what muscles do medial rotation of the shoulder? And while you're coming off mute, I just want to welcome Pauline. I'm glad you're here. And Bain, I'm glad that you're here as well. Go ahead, Rhonda.
So let's see. The pectoral muscles are involved. I think it's the teres minor and the subscapularis. I just wasn't sure if moving the scapula lateral was part of it.
Okay, so scapulas don't move laterally, but
well,
shoulder
around the rib cage.
So see, this is why I love this conversation. When we get super clear, and by the way, I just want to say, learning knees and shoulders always gave me the sweats when I was learning. I was like, oh, because it's complicated, right? There's so many joints that are happening up here that sometimes we mistake shoulder movement for being scapular movement, or shoulder movement being glenohumeral joint movement. And we need to know the difference because there's different muscles involved. So I get it, right? Like, I'm not pop quizzing anybody, and I'm not meaning to sound flip in any way, but I'm encouraging us to know, like, what is the joint action? And so when we're like, well, it's this, when we're kind of vague about it, then our results are vague. And that's how I started our conversation today. I don't want our results to be vague. I want our results to be targeted, where a client's like, oh my gosh, finally, after all these weeks or months, my pain is gone. Thank you, right? They feel great. We feel great. Our work is effective and on purpose. And sometimes it's trial and error. I get that, but we want to do more effectiveness and less trial and erroring. Okay. So to answer your question, Rhonda, I love to answer questions with questions. Scapula don't medially and laterally rotate. That would be coming off the rib cage and on the rib cage. They don't rotate. They move, but they stay in this plane. Okay, except for protraction, they come a little bit forward, but they're not meant to wing off the back. That's not a plane of movement that's optimal for scapula. It's something that can happen, but it's not winging is not a joint action, for example. It's a result of muscles not doing their job effectively in that lever system. But medial and lateral rotation of the shoulder happens here in this ball and socket joint. Rotation happens where there's roundness. So we need to know then that the action's happening here. Joint action happens at this joint when we're talking medial and lateral rotation. And then what muscles do that job? And that is straight up muscle memory, right? So if you guys are still learning your muscles, awesome. Please let us support you in that. We have a 5-day muscle challenge. If you haven't done that already, we cover 50 muscles in 5 days. Do that challenge. And if you're ready to actually know muscles so that you could restore function, take the muscles and movement course. We literally talk about every muscle in its movement and the muscles that contract and the muscles that lengthen. And And of course, with over 600 muscles, it takes us a minute to do that. Nothing I can do for you in the next 6 minutes, but I will tell you to go back to your book, because that's the cool thing about muscles. It's rote memorization at a certain point, right? Like you get to know the muscles, and I like to learn the muscles. They all have personalities, which helps you know what they're up to instead of just memorizing them, which can be a little bit dry. And then also you get to implement what you're learning, which we also do in that course. So you learn it, you learn a lot of characteristics of it, you learn their action in movement, and then you implement it right away. And so it sort of sticks in that way. And that's the way I think learning muscles is really valuable. And again, for both movement and manual practitioners, because if you're restoring someone's pain and you're the manual person, their pain comes from how they're moving or not moving. Okay, so medial and lateral rotation of the shoulder, not of the scapula, super important. And let me just wrap this part of the talk up with the reciprocal inhibition, which is what I was leading us up to. Whenever we're working with joint movement and muscles move joints, muscles do the movement and the joint is where the action happens. Whenever we're doing that movement, what we want to think about is that, yes, a main muscle does that job and another muscle responds to that job, right? So a main muscle does elbow flexion, and we've like, oh, let me use my own. Let me use Murph. I was trying to use my own and I don't give him enough airtime. So if we're going to go flex the elbow, we most of us know it's biceps and then triceps lengthen. And then to lengthen the arm back down to the side, extend the elbow, the triceps lengthen, the triceps contract, and the biceps lengthen. So that's mainly the lever system. I really recommend learning joint action like that. One main guy for one main guy. One main guy doing the work, one main guy opposing the work or allowing the work, right? And just learn it back and forth like that until you're positive that you've got joint action and you know the main guy that does the work. And then you stack it into what's called reciprocal inhibition, which is still a lever system concept, but it talks about all the muscles that do that job. All the muscles, because while yes, one muscle is mainly targeted as its main job is XYZ joint action, it never does that by itself. The brain does not wire muscles to move by themselves. So what I like to, let me just about change my subject again. I like to do that. I get super fired up here. The brain does not wire one muscle to move at a time. The brain is wired to move muscles in a concert, like an orchestra. One sound coming from the stage from the orchestra, one musical piece, but all the instruments have a play in that sound being created. It's the same thing with muscles. When I go to bend my elbow, yes, there's a main guy that does that, but he doesn't work alone. There's a whole host of other muscles that help him out. Same thing with the lengthening side of the lever. And then when the lever reverses its action and this muscle contracts and this lengthens, it's also done in concert. So we need to know all of the muscles at play. But I don't think that's the best way to learn them. I don't think that learning reciprocal inhibition out of the gate works. And certainly the feedback that I got from that practitioner confirmed that. It's like, whoa, way too much too soon. It is. You get to first know that movement happens at a joint and be like, oh, is it the scapula or the shoulder? Like right there, we get to just pause and like take a breath. What is actually moving? Okay, cool. It's the shoulder. No, it's the scapula. No, it's the shoulder. Okay, great. Now, what's the movement? Medial, lateral, right? Extension, flexion. Okay, cool. And now what main muscle does that action? What's the main guy? Because that's the main guy doing most of the work, called an agonist in reciprocal inhibition. The agonist is the muscle contracting. That's the action, the main guy. And then find out who's allowing it on the other side of the lever. And then you start packing the orchestra, right? It's like you get the solo artist to do the main sound of the song, and then you get all the instruments to come in until it fills. But if you get all of the instruments all at one time, all of the muscles all at one time, it can feel overwhelming. So absolutely, I recommend going through the principles of anatomy and learning them in place and then applying them to real life. Once you learn how they work and who's doing the work, then you can start deciding who's not doing the work. How could we possibly go into a situation, a scenario with a client who's having pain when they do a certain action, which is probably not the action. It's probably a hybrid of the action because they're in pain. So they're compensating and they're not actually lifting their arm, creating the movement in the shoulder or moving their hip the right way. They're compensating. They're recruiting other muscles even potentially. Maybe one of the guys of the lever isn't even doing the contraction. They stepped back, the glute max never contracted, for example. Once someone comes to us with a discrepancy, we can't go into the discrepancy and try to find an answer if we don't even know what the solution is supposed to look like. If we don't know that glute max is the main guy that does hyperextension of the hip and how to know if it's actually contracted when we're in a clinical setting, if we don't know that in the clinical setting, then how are we going to resolve their pain? We got to know what the anatomy is, what the functional anatomy is, and how that looks and how it works, to be able to hear through a client's complaint of pain or see through a client's functional discrepancy to be able to restore the function and get them out of pain. And I feel like what we tend to do is, with all of the goodness in our heart and our passion for what we do, we aim to like go at a muscle to try to solve the problem, but we're not even really clear what the function is meant to be. So how do you know what the problem is? The problem is not the pain, believe it or not. Pain is a message. Pain is a message from the body saying, hey, I believe that you're going to listen to me if I speak up and I have something to say, because what you're doing isn't working for me. And that's what pain is about. Pain is not meant to be eradicated. It's meant to be honored and listened to and be like, oh, okay, what's the body trying to tell me here? It's trying to tell you that the function, the way the body is designed, is somehow askew. So we get to find out what the function is. We get to find out what functional anatomy is, how it works, and then figure out what's gone wrong. Not just jump into a muscle that's giving us a symptom. Rarely is the muscle that's giving us the symptom the problem anyway. We know that from referral pain. We have data that tells us it's, at most a 20% chance that the muscle that's giving you a pain sensation is the problem. It's usually more in the function, what is or isn't happening, right? And so we get to figure out what that is. Joan, I'm glad you just came in. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Okay, so as always, I can talk forever, and I always promise I will only talk for the first 30 minutes and then turn over questions. So I would love to hear from you. What are you guys hearing in this conversation about joint action, lever system, reciprocal inhibition, muscles? Any questions that you have on that, or any other questions that you have too? And so I know some of you are not here on camera, and you are not on mic either. And I know that that's because some of you are working clinically and you're choosing to be quiet and also still listen with an earbud. One of my practitioners tells me she listens with an earbud in all of her sessions. That's cool, whatever you get to do. But I'm very eager to answer your questions. So if you're not on mic right now, please do type your questions into the chat. Let me know what questions that you have. I will happily answer them. Also, if you're listening on the replay, which I welcome you being here, please leave your questions in the comment section. I always answer them all personally, and I would love to hear from you. So any questions? We're here for the next little bit. I'm happy to answer questions. Also want to invite all of you to our upcoming summit on June 6th, 7th, and 8th. It's all about functional anatomy and the framework for that functional anatomy. So we have a panel of speakers. It's 3 days live. They are going to pour into you. It's completely free. It's just us being generous and pouring into you, kind of like we're doing here on Tuesdays. And so any or all of that you are able to attend from 11:30 to 2:30 Eastern, please mark it in your calendar now. If you're here and you're on my mailing list, you'll definitely get an invite in the next newsletter that comes out. So you'll have access to the link to sign up for that. And if you want to be welcomed and you are not on the newsletter list, please do send me your email address and we'll absolutely get you registered for the event. And share with all the colleagues that you know and love, because we all get to be uplifted all together. It's such a great event. These 3-day events just really, I feel lit up, like I'm high after the end of talking to master practitioners for 3 days. So please do mark your calendars, June 6th, 7th, and 8th. All right, so what questions do we have for today? Anything on functional anatomy, applying functional anatomy, anything on the lever system, reciprocal inhibition? I certainly hope that our conversation here today added some clarity for you about functional anatomy and the lever system, and definitely about reciprocal inhibition, because it's definitely something that knowing reciprocal inhibition and the muscles that are at play, all of them, when your clients are exhibiting pain or restriction, even if there's no pain with the restriction, knowing the muscles at play of reciprocal inhibition is the ticket to freedom. Knowing what they do, knowing what they're meant to do, recognizing that they're not doing what they're meant to do, and then using your tools to replace what they're showing up with and bringing them back to function the way we're designed will always bring them to zero pain. If we move our bodies the way they're designed, we will not be in pain. If we hold our bodies in alignment the way it's designed structurally, we will not be in pain. It's that simple. It's simple and it's complex because we get to know all the muscles at play for that. Okay, my loves, any questions? Any questions? I don't see anything coming in on the chat. Rhonda, you have any other last questions? You're here and brave and live each week.
I was just curious about what you were just talking about with analyzing what's moving and what's not moving, and how do you analyze that?
Oh, how do you mean, how do you assess what's moving, or how do you assess the lever system?
How do you assess what's moving correctly, what's moving incorrectly, who's overworking, who's not working, etc.
Perfect. It's like ties up in a bow exactly what we just talked about today. So this is fantastic. So I like to use, oh, Murph just lost his head. Did you guys hear that? It just hit the floor. He's been through it, man. He's been shoved in so many suitcases. When I travel teach, he just gets shoved in. Pauline, hi Gina. I have no questions, but I like the teaching. It's a good review for me. Oh, good. I'm so glad. And I'm glad that you're here. Perfect. So some of us do know reciprocal inhibition in the lever system and some of us don't. And great review if we need it, and got to have it if we don't, if it's not review. Okay, so let's use the shoulder just because it's easier to show the shoulder, although I feel kind of bad for Murph's head. I like to usually use the hips, but his legs are not attached. He's just a mess, my dear assistant. Okay, Rhonda, I'm gonna answer your question. All right, so let's say for example, we have a client who is having difficulty in extension of the shoulder. Okay, when their arm goes back, there's some issue here, and they're pointing and they're like, you know, kind of pointing. Well, we know this is the way to solve that problem for them. Going to the way the body is designed, the way the anatomy is organized, we know that in hyperextension of the elbow, or excuse me, of the shoulder, some of us use this as extension, some of us use this as hyperextension. So I just want to clarify that. When our arm is behind us, the action here at this joint means that these muscles lengthen and these muscles contract. We got to know that, so that when a client says, when I do this, it hurts, the answer isn't that don't do that. The answer is, why is it, right? Like another question for a question. So if I know that these muscles are contracting and the muscles that do the job are always the muscles contracting, and the muscles that allow the job are the ones that are lengthening, the first place to look for the easiest solution is to go to the muscles that contract and see if they're contracting. And you get to do that with the tools that you have, right? So we all have tools that are on our deck because we're all practitioners here. So how would you tell if this muscle was contracting? Do that. If it is, then that's not where the problem is. If it isn't contracting, make it contract. And again, use your tools to do that. If you don't have enough tools and you want more tools, I'll happily give you more tools, but I'm assuming you guys have tools. So we know that in order for the arm to come behind the midline like this, these muscles have to contract. Are they doing that? And it's the main guy that's doing the contraction, and it's his synergists, right? Reciprocal inhibition, all the muscles that do contraction, because it's never just one muscle. Muscles don't work in solo, they work in concert. So what's the main guy? Go there first. That's the biggest effect you can have. And if he's not doing the contraction, well, hello, there's the problem. If he is doing the contraction, but a synergist is having a problem, go there next. And then go to the opposite side of the lever and recognize, is this muscle and group of muscles lengthening? If it's not, get it to lengthen. And again, use your tools for that. Okay. The next thing I'll say is that if the contraction is happening and the lengthening is happening in all of the muscles involved in reciprocal inhibition, the next thing you've got to consider is the alignment of the joint when it's making that movement. So in another masterclass, we taught this one live last year. It was awesome. So many of you came and I loved it. The functional anatomy masterclass talked about the formula that I have found to be over and over again the answer, which is alignment first, then strength, meaning muscle contraction, then function. So it goes like this. If I bring the arm back behind the midline and the shoulder goes into extension or hyperextension, depending on what you call it, and the muscles that do the job of contraction are doing it, including all the synergists, and the muscles that do the lengthening are doing it, but there's still discrepancy here in pain or function, you've got to look at the alignment of the torso, the axial skeleton, and the shoulder joint itself. Because even when you're using the muscles to do the job, if the frame is not aligned to be in neutral for that function to occur, you'll exhibit pain. And most of us are not using alignment in the way that we need to. And so we start strengthening and overstrengthening or stretching and overstretching, thinking that that's going to get rid of the pain, when really there's nothing wrong with the lever system. It's just that it's not being utilized on an aligned frame. And in order to know alignment, it's another class, which I will happily, we'll go into that another Tuesday if you want to do that. But alignment, strength, function is the name of the game. I can't tell you how often I use that over and over and over again. And it's the ticket when I'm sharing this with practitioners. First things first though, before you start going down the weeds of alignment, today, what I'm asking you to consider is, do you know the anatomy? Because if you don't know the anatomy, you won't really be able to optimize the alignment either. You got to know anatomy. You've got to know the function of anatomy as well. There aren't the same things. You got to know the parts and you got to know the way that they work. So the way that they work is through reciprocal inhibition. The way movement happens in the body is through reciprocal inhibition, which again, just to recap, we talked today that means know that the movement is happening at the joint, know what the joint action is, know what muscle does that action. The action is contraction, it's not stretch. Lengthening is in response to contraction. Know the main muscle that does each contract and lengthen, and then reverse them, know that lever, and then start adding on all of the other players in reciprocal inhibition, and then start addressing function. And function means, can they do the job? Meaning, can the client move their body to do the action that they want to do? And can they do that with ease, without any pain? And can they do that in full range? And if the answer to that is no, there's a discrepancy in their function. In order to correct that, then you move on to the formula of alignment, strength, and function. You got to know the anatomy first to be able to start getting into complexities and problem solving. And honestly, so many of you are doing such amazing work and your minds think with such creative strategies that you light me up for real. And the missing piece is like foundational anatomy, and how the parts work together is usually what's missing. In my experience working with practitioners for all this time. So definitely get a strong base of functional anatomy and then use your tools. Sometimes it is a case that a practitioner just doesn't have the right tool. You know, they've been to a lot of workshops. We've talked about this in other Tuesday trainings where, you know, a lot of us, especially if you're here, you're information hungry, right? I have certificates that could fill a wall. I could wallpaper a house with them because I love learning, just like you. But it doesn't mean that every workshop is going to give you the tool or the context to use the tool in. Sometimes workshops are refreshers like this. We're talking for an hour today, right? You're not going to learn anything that's going to absolutely theoretically change what you do, but it'll be a good reminder. And sometimes workshops or quick CEs, if you're doing your renewal for whatever, you know, for example, they're not really creating a hardy enough base for you to have an implementable toolbox or methodology to create results consistently. And sometimes all that knowledge can kind of like rattle around and you don't really know like how and when to utilize it. So if that's the case, then you get to find a method that works for you. That's one of the things that I love. I don't necessarily teach you how to be a massage therapist or a yoga teacher, for example. You got to come with that. But it puts a whole lot of context to what you're doing as both manual and movement practitioners. And then you're like, oh, this is A to B to C to get me to the answer. Instead of, I just want a solution and I don't know how to actually get there, I'm going to try. Trying is great, and we want results, right? We want results. So Rhonda, to get back to your question specifically, how do you assess when something's off? You got to look at the function and whether the function is working the way the body is designed, and then utilize your tools to restore that function. That's the simplest bullet point answer. And I would work with the lever system anytime you're working with discrepancies. One side of that lever is either doing its job or not doing its job, or both sometimes, and you get to find out what the job is, and then use your tools, your assessment tools, to decide if it's actually doing its job. Then use your other tools to restore the function. And that's it. Okay, great. I'm looking at the chat. Are there any other questions? Anybody else have any questions while you're here? Pauline, you said it's a reminder for you. That's awesome. Joan, I'm so glad to see you. We talked a few weeks ago. I hope everything is going great in your world, by the way. I've been thinking about you a lot since our phone call. Okay, my loves, any other questions while you have me today? You can't hear me? Ah, how come? I'm right here. Oh, now you can. It's interesting, right? I don't know what happened there. All right, my love. What's that? Joan, hey.
Hey, good morning. Sorry, I am at a different time zone, so I missed half of that. But always thank you for your offerings, and I miss not having that community of sharing. So I appreciate this from another state, another country.
Yeah.
Future maybe conversation I'd love to hear, because it seems to be more of a topic that I think in your country, which I think is amazing that you have more access to research that is now happening on hypermobility, and that there's not efficiency in the medical system for proper screening of various kinds of hypermobility. So I think it's a topic that we're understanding a little bit more in depth about how maybe the answer of overstretching or pain or just internal function of digestion and anxiety. So I'd love to hear from everyone in their community, their strategies as well.
Oh, Joan, this is such a juicy topic. It's like one of my favorites. So hypermobility, we can absolutely talk about hypermobility. And I'm realizing we've talked about these things in previous Tuesday trainings. And so thank you for reminding me that sometimes we get to repeat things. Doesn't mean that, and even as practitioners, I'm going to go off on a tiny bit of a tangent. I'm going to come right back to hypermobility, Joan, so hang with me. But I want to really land this message for you guys. Sometimes when we're movement practitioners and manual practitioners, we tend to think that our students or clients are getting bored with what we're offering. And we feel like sometimes we have to like paint a rainbow for them or hang the moon. And the truth is that it's the bases, the base, the foundation, the things that are true they never expire. They never grow old, right? So you're reminding me of that, Joan, as you're talking, because I think, I've got to come up with a new topic, right? No, sometimes we get to repeat the same real good ones because there's so much meat in them. And hypermobility is one of them. So I am like the poster child for hypermobility. You're right, Joan, you called me on it. I'm hypermobile myself. A big piece of my method addresses hypermobility. We have a test that as a tool that I offer. You don't even have to be in the mastery program. It's in several of my trainings where we run there's no machines involved, right? We're practitioners, but we can run clients through joint movement and assess their mobility in a range, of course. And the formula that we just talked about, that alignment, strength, function formula, absolutely needs to be followed when we're working with hypermobility, and it doesn't get followed ABC. there's a it's like a whack-a-mole. You have to like keep working the formula. And we talked about that again in the masterclass last year, which is available for you guys if you want it. I will absolutely spend the next several training Tuesdays talking about hypermobility, because you're right, it is so important, and it causes more pain than I think we even give attention to, even in my own body, right? Like I'm still reminded, as of this year, 2023, I'm still reminded of the effect of hypermobility when it comes to pain and function. It is staggering how much effect it has on a person's experience physically, and how rarely it's addressed. You're right, Joan, even in the States. But we do it a lot in the method, and I will absolutely bring that to Tuesday trainings because it's just that valuable. And there's a lot of misconception about what hypermobility means, and yoga seems to be an audience that I like to talk to a lot, but anybody who's very stretch centric also really needs to know about hypermobility. And I would say the same thing for manual practitioners. The pain that your clients are coming with could actually be made much worse if you release muscles on a hypermobile frame, even when those muscles present as tight. And that gets us to not only not create the results that we want, but sometimes we can even make results worse for clients. And so that's a big word of caution. So definitely worthwhile to talk about, and I will happily bring it for the next several training Tuesdays. And Joan, there's no worry at all that you didn't catch the beginning of this conversation. It's available for you. You could go back and watch the first half of it on the replay on YouTube. The cool thing about YouTube is that you can also speed it up. So I'll talk twice as fast, but you'll get it done in half the time. So that really works. And if for some reason you don't make it to the next few weeks, just know that we'll be talking about hypermobility upon requests. Love it. It'll take us a couple weeks to get through all the points I want to make. We can also, obviously answer questions on anything else. And I want to just end, Joan, with saying that I really appreciate that you love the community here. I love the community too. I welcome you to come back anytime and all the time. And that's not only just for you, Joan, it's for all of us. Come back all the time. That's why we have our Facebook group. Again, reminder that Facebook group is a vetted group of practitioners. The only thing we ever talk about is anatomy. That's it. There's no other conversations. It's a quiet group at times. It's also a vocal group at other times, depends on what's happening in our community, but there's always a safe place to talk there. And I really believe that we get out of this mind space of competition and get into the mind space of collaboration. There are more people that need us than there are those of us to serve. We are not in a world of scarcity unless you believe that you are, because your beliefs create your reality. And the more we collaborate, the better results we create, the more livelihood we have, and the more excitement that everybody experiences. So we absolutely get to collaborate. It's another reason why I host 3-day summits every year, so that we can, get in the energy of generosity, come together, be generous with each other, support each other, and then go out there and do your work. So please do join the community, invite your colleagues to join our community. Absolutely, everyone is welcome to talk anatomy and client work. And again, just mark your calendars for June 6th, 7th, and 8th of this year, and we'll send that information out on your next newsletter. Okay, my loves, in the last few minutes here, we just have a few minutes left. Is there any other last minute question that I can support you with today while we're still here? Does the summit have a replay? That's a good question, Rhonda. So the summit, the summit replays are available for 24 hours. So if you're like, one of those days I'm already booked with clients, no problem. Register anyway, because then you'll get the email at the end of the day that says you have 24 hours to watch this replay. And again, you can speed up the replay so it won't take you as much time. So definitely come live so that you can ask questions and, be in the energy of our community. And the speakers, all the speakers, including me, everybody wants to. You're welcome, Joan. You're welcome. All of the speakers definitely want to interact with you and answer your questions. We're not here to hear ourselves talk. We're here to support you and serve you. So absolutely come live when you can. And yes, you'll have 24 hours to catch up on a replay if for some reason you're already booked that day. I know 3 days in the middle of the day is a big commitment. So I would expect you to work and do your good work and then get the knowledge. So definitely register either way so that you can get those emails. You won't be getting emails and notifications about replays unless you're registered for that event. Okay, Rhonda, it looks like you're typing one more last question, so I'm going to wait till you're finished. Wait till you're finished. Is there a schedule of events of speakers? Yes, there is. So it's 11:30 to 2:30 Eastern on the 6th, 7th, and 8th of June. And the speakers are being confirmed as we speak. And when you register for the event, you'll also have access to the website for the event, which will have all the speakers listed and the times that they're speaking. And they all give a free gift too. So free downloadables. So more knowledge, more power. So thanks for asking for that. I will also put the link to the summit. You're welcome, Rhonda. I'll put the link to the summit below this video as well, so that you have access to that there. And definitely make sure that if we don't have your email address, that you let us have that if you want us to send it to you directly. Okay, my loves, it's been so fun talking about super important functional anatomy. I love that you guys got some good takeaways from this. Thank you, Joan, for bringing us our next topic for next week and the week after, which is super great. And I will see you guys then. Thank you so much for being here, for contributing to the conversation. Thank you for sharing this with other colleagues in our industry. Everybody gets to rise together. When one of us wins, we all win. That's just how it goes. The world is abundant, and I really appreciate your contribution. Pauline, please send me the link to the summit. Didn't see it in my email. Okay, Pauline, we will definitely send that, and make sure, I'm guessing, Pauline, that we do have your email, because it sounds like you too, Rhonda. Okay, awesome. Want to make sure that we have your email addresses. Every once in a while, this is a little mechanics that I hate to end it on this, but every once in a while, if you haven't opened emails in a while, or if they've been sent into your promotion folders and you haven't clicked on them, the way the servers work and the way email spam laws are, super thankfully, crunching down on all of us, it might be that you no longer get the emails anymore. The server will just stop sending them to you if it looks like you're not an active email recipient. So if that ever happens, it's never because we want to X you out. It's always an inclusive environment here. But just know that if you're not getting emails from me and you want to, just send me an email directly, and I'll definitely look in the back and make sure that you're set up to receive them. So if anybody here is listening and that's happening to you, please let us know. We definitely want to be in service to you and not make you feel like you're left out. But I will double check those emails for those of you who are here today. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Thank you for being here and for participating in this fruitful conversation. I'm really excited for what's to come for us for the rest of this year. Always nice review at the beginning of a month. Thank you for being here and for all the great work that you do in the world. I'll see you guys next week. Bye for now.